Hi, Julia. Thank you so much for joining the conversation today. It's such a pleasure to have you here at the Carbon Capture Global Summit 2025.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So first of all, as we all know, that Harbour Energy has quickly been one of Europe's largest CCUS portfolios, with flagship projects like Viking in the UK, Green and Greenstone in Denmark, and several licenses in Norway. To start, how do you see CCS evolving from the pilot scale to commercial deployment in the next 5 to 10 years?
Thanks for the question. I think that the pilot projects, or not even just the pilot projects, but so to say early projects, the first movers or the second movers, but I would say the first group of projects will largely determine how quickly the industry can develop, because there are a lot of challenges and barriers that need to be addressed and resolved before such projects can go ahead. And I think what the industry is trying to do is starting with something relatively simple. And by the way, nothing in CCS is simple, but in comparison, and then moving to longer value chains, more complex value chains, bigger scale projects that will only get more complex. So if we can't get the first ones right, then it will be very difficult to get bigger. So if I use our portfolio as an example, and we do have an extensive portfolio of projects. I think at post-Wintershall Dare transaction, we had about 10 licenses at different phase of maturity. And for the company of our size, this is really a lot. So what we think is the right way to go is to select a few projects that we believe are best placed to be those first movers. And there are different reasons why each project can be characterized this way. And then it is quite a long way before you deliver these projects and before you solve all the commercial and other challenges linked to that, before you can talk about scaling it further. And I think this is really not how we measure success. So we don't measure success that, we need to get all the 10 licenses delivered and then setting some volumetric or numeric targets. We really want to get a few projects right to demonstrate that this can be done, to find solutions to the risks and challenges that we all faced along the value chain, and then replicate it to more projects later. So it's basically phase, pilot, test, then learn from what you have done, and then scale. And that's why we do really like projects that allow the modular development. Something that you can start relatively small with a relatively short value chain, and that will economically still be possible and still be viable to deliver. And then once you get the first or the second customer, then it should get much easier to add more. And that can be adding more customers, that can be expanding capacity, that can be developing more transportation value chains, but really doing it in a modular way, because then the risks will be also managed sequentially.
Yes, such a large project couldn't be done in a day and must be done step by step from pilot to the final full commercial edition, as you just mentioned. Now let's zoom into the Viking project, one of the most flagship projects that Harbour Energy is developing right now. As we all know, this project has completed the FID and secures the deployment consent for its onshore pipeline while targeting up to 50 million ton per annum of CO2 storage by 2035. So what are the key steps and decisions needed now to move Viking towards the final FID? And looking broader, what policy clarities or the changes are most urgently needed to unlock the final investment decision for the UK CCS?
Sure. So if I talk about Viking, and this is indeed a flagship project in our portfolio, something that we are very proud of in terms of where the project is today. It has completed successfully FEED and received the DCO earlier this year, which means that effectively we have done all the necessary technical work in de-risking the project. And we should be able to move to the next stage and get closer to FID once there is a sufficient commercial maturation in place. And what needs to happen to get to this level of commercial maturity is basically very much up to the UK government to deliver on that key milestone from their side, which effectively means three things. First, they need to sequence the UK emitters, who will be the first users of our project. But secondly, they need to confirm the business models that those emitters will be leveraging, that will provide de-risking and financial support mechanisms to those emitters. And then finally, and very importantly, the government will need to provide the funding envelope for those emitters. We were hoping that these things will already be happening, and basically that I think our initial plan was to have an FID late 25, early 26. With what we are seeing and with the government taking a longer time to be ready on their end to provide those elements, this means that we will have to wait for this readiness and for the green light from the government to effectively start working with the emitters and start negotiating the business models with the emitters. And we do have a clear indication from the government that this will happen within this parliament, but this parliament is quite a broad time frame. So it's very difficult to say now when exactly this FID will happen, because this will, as I said, fully dependent on the UK government. And hopefully, of course, we would be willing to do it sooner rather than later. But I think it is something we cannot really say definitively until knowing, what time frame is available on their end. But certainly within this parliament, and we do believe that Viking should be operational in the early 2030s, which of course will include the UK emitters, the Track 2 emitters. But we also think that we should be looking at European emitters in parallel. There is no need for us to really delay the European side until later, because I think we always were previously talking about, the early phase with UK cluster, Track 2, and then the build out with the European emissions coming in later. But because the first part is now being delayed, then we can't potentially do this in parallel with European emissions, which will be very much subject again to the regulatory framework and whether there is a regulatory framework to bring in European volumes earlier. But it does not affect the FID. To your question, for FID, this is purely up to the UK government to deliver on their end and provide those three things that I have described.
Yes. In addition to the Viking project with the CO2 hub like Wilhelmshaven in Germany and Immingham in the UK, Harbour is also working on the cross-border CO2 transport. So how do you see the commercial model for the CO2 shipping and cross-border storage developing across Europe?
Okay, maybe before I speak about shipping and hubs, I realized I didn't fully answer your previous question because you were also asking what, not just Viking specific, but generally for the UK projects to progress, what is really needed and what changes are needed. I think it's not really the changes. It's actually, on the contrary, we do not want changes because I think that the government has done a great job and spent a lot of time developing all those business models, and they have been tested and implemented with already a number of Track 1 projects and customers. So we actually would be very keen to work and follow the similar approach. So I think the right approach here would be, again, to use similar business models that apply to Track 1, but expand those to also Track 2 projects like Viking and also other Track 2 projects like Acorn. But I think changing the business models at this stage may not be a great idea because A, it will take even longer, which will delay things even longer. And then I think, those models have been already tested and should be feasible if the first projects can reach their FIDs. So not changing things too quickly is good because it will also give more confidence to the market, to investors, to project developers, to emitters. I think we need some consistency also with that. And that's why hopefully we will be using similar or the same approach as the initial projects did. And then moving to your second question or your last question on hubs and shipping, I don't think there is a single model defined yet for Harbour or for a project. I think shipping market and shipping model is being shaped, and it is more complex than pipeline for obvious reasons. So it will take time to develop. There may be more than one model, and most likely there will be different models because different projects and different companies will have different appetite to be in shipping and to include shipping into the battery limits of of specific projects or to have shipping as a separate solution. I think there are all possible combinations. The important part is that, yes, you need hubs. So you need aggregation and consolidation of volumes. And somehow someone needs to help and develop those hubs because that's quite an important element in the full chain. And it is interesting to see how this evolves. Yes, we do have, as Harbour, we have two positions in the two hubs that you mentioned. So for Viking, it is absolutely critical. And we have that long-standing relationships with ABP in Immingham because this is an integral part of the Viking project. So of course, we see this as the import route for the Euro emissions into our store. And we see how this can be developed and offered as a combined solution, terminal service, and then the storage and then the transportation. How we do shipping and whether shipping becomes part of the combined solution or whether shipping is something we leave to emitters, I think that remains to be seen, and there probably will be different options because we clearly see some emitters who are very keen to be in charge of their own shipping so that they can maintain flexibility to use their own fleet and use different stores. Others do not want to go there. We as Harbour are not particularly keen to be in shipping. We don't have really shipping expertise. We are exploration and production company with the CCS angle, but not a shipping company. But we do have partners in different projects, and then we may have partners in the project that actually may be very suitable to be to lead the shipping part. I think that remains to be seen, and that may differ from project to project. There is no right or wrong solution here, but I think the important message is that we always need to look at it through the prism of cross-chain risks and how those risks can be managed and addressed with multiple parties involved, multiple parties who are providing terminal services, who are providing shipping services, storage, transportation, whoever does what, but we all need to kind of get together and think, is that feasible? Would that work for emitters? Because we heard earlier today that, emitters do not accept quadruple exposure for taking the full risks on everything in case of, outages or any other operational issues. So we need to think through this prism when developing the shipping model.
Yes. Thank you so much, Julia, for sharing so many stories behind the scenes and the details I think people or the industry are keen to know. So now, speaking of the demand side, as we all know, the industrial emitter will be the key customers for the CCUS projects. So from a commercial perspective, how are you structuring the partnerships with hard-to-abate industries to ensure the reliable demands for your storage capacity?
I think the first important thing is to identify who those partners are and who should be your primary, anchor customers or target customers, because everyone is talking to everyone. All emitters are exploring all options. All stores are talking to different emitters. But I think at some point it is really important to narrow down on both sides and to understand, okay, who is the most promising partner for me based on a number of reasons. Of course, largely just driven by the value chain and how logical it is for them to send their volumes into your store, and how competitive you should stand on the list of different options. So finding a good fit in terms of timelines for the projects. Of course, you need to be more or less aligned on your target dates, but then also on the value chain, so that you try and target those emitters that have the most competitive or should have the most competitive value chain into your store, less complexity. Of course, the sector matters. We see some sectors being slightly ahead of other sectors. So I just understanding who are your kind of top priority customers is first important part. Then you need to really develop that partnership relationship. Because I think we touched upon that early in one of the discussions today. Before you get to FID, there is a long time that you need to work very closely and invest significant money on both sides in, progressing the feasibility studies, progressing pre-feasibility, feasibility, FEED, all this work, knowing that, there is a similar effort happening on the other side, and that you have a parallel development of the project. So important to establish that long-term relationship and establish sufficient transparency and trust, of course. I think then this involves at some point having a sort of exclusivity partnership. So this is not about specific terms, but it's more about having this exclusive partnership that, okay, you are my preferred store, you are my preferred customers, because it's just impossible to find time to negotiate with tens of different counterparties. And then it becomes the kind of lengthy process of commercial negotiations, and again, different level of agreements, from something simple, term sheets, and then ultimately moving to the fully termed agreements, which will take, a year or 2 or 3 to develop. But kind of maintaining that relationship and visibility into the projects and trust is absolutely key to reach that fully binding agreement, because there are a lot of difficult topics, and I think the long-term commitment ultimately will be required from all emitters, and most stores will require that long-term commitment to use send volumes and pay for that capacity. And then again, structuring that is not a simple thing, but as long as kind of there is willingness on both sides, and of course it's good when there is a time frame that incentivizes this to progress at a certain pace. Usually these are the subsidy schemes, the funding, whether it's innovation fund or some CD type of agreement that incentivizes both sides to really progress those negotiations at a certain pace to be able to meet the target dates set by a certain subsidy scheme.
Yes. Last question for you, Julia. If we are looking beyond 2030, what does a success look like for Harbour Energy in CCS? And what will it take for people to get there?
So I think, as I kind of alluded earlier, for us, it's not the scale or the size or the number of projects. It's really the quality of projects that we want to deliver. And that's why having a disciplined delivery is absolutely first priority. So we don't want to go bigger or scale or have more before we can have sufficient proof points that this works, and we can have a good investable project. We can have customers, and I think we see a line of sight to this, but there is still quite a long way to go and resolve a number of mainly commercial challenges actually, but also of course some technical milestones to get to FID. That's why I would say we hope to have a few more FIDs before 2030. We hope to see the projects be ready, operationally ready, 2030 or early 2030s. And then if that comes as expected, if we can see that, the business case that we have defined is actually delivering and working as we planned, then I think that's a good proof point that this is working, and this is where we can think of scaling and adding more capacity or more projects. But that's, I think, first measure of success would be really successfully delivering the key projects that we have in our portfolio already. So I would say quality over quantity of delivered projects and FIDs.
Yes. Julia, thank you so much for sharing with us all this incredibly informative and useful insights into Harbour Energy CCUS strategies, project, and the vision. I think it's really clear that your team's expertise and the leadership will be critical to advancing the carbon capture at scale across the whole Europe. And I really appreciate your time to walk us through both technical and commercial perspective of your work. And I look forward to seeing how Harbour Energy will have a continued impact on this beyond.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.